Hello viewers, if you are familiar with the channel, welcome back. If you aren't familiar with the channel, then thanks for tuning in, where we cover solved and unsolved true crime stories that focus more on serial killers. However, we have been known to divert on occasion, as you will experience in this episode. If this is your sort of thing, kindly leave us a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos. Okay, so let's get into it. So in this video, which, just to kindly note, this is part 2 of the Jonbenet Ramsey murder investigation, we will cover the details of the investigation, the suspects, both prime and just downright crazy, and more modern developments that have arisen recently in regards to the case. If you haven't seen part 1, I suggest you go back and watch it because I won't be doing much of a recap. So get cozy, grab a drink, and lock the doors. This story takes place in Boulder, Colorado, the United States, and involves the brutal murder of 6-year-old child beauty queen, Jonbenet Ramsey. So just a quick recap before we jump back into the investigation. Jonbenet's body was found on the 26th of December 1996 by her dad John and a family friend, after an initial police sweep failed to check the lower parts of the house. The 6-year-old had a garrote tied about her neck, and she had been bound by her wrists and potentially sexually assaulted. A few items had been found nearby, but nothing had been conclusive. Right, now we've had a little recap, let's delve into the facts about the investigation. So the first part I need to bring your attention to, viewers, is, quite frankly, the total shit show that was the investigation. Remember from part 1, the police had only cordoned off Jonbenet's room, allowing the family and friends of the family and anyone else that for some reason was allowed in that house to roam free and potentially trample lots of evidence. Now, it wasn't just that, but they'd also brought in inexperienced investigators and forensic specialists to undertake procedures that really should have been handled by those with a lot more experience and a lot more understanding of cases this complex. Total respect for deputies and sheriffs, but your average deputy isn't going to have the knowledge or to understand the nuances involved with such a complex investigation. Remember, this is sleepy Boulder, Colorado. It's not the middle of downtown LA where murders happen daily, and they're equipped for those sort of scenarios. There had also been evidence shared with the Ramsey family. Okay, they were Jonbenet's parents, I hear that, but they were still suspects. Everyone is a suspect until they've been ruled out. So don't share evidence. I mean, is it just me or is that too obvious? Not only these glaring errors, but the Ramseys hadn't even undergone an official interview until well after the discovery of Jonbenet's body. Okay, I'm no experienced cop, I get it, but I have some grey matter, despite the hair colour. The police that were involved in this investigation should have used theirs just a little bit more. Poirot would not be pleased with you. I know I sound like I'm going on a bit of a rant, but it's just frustrating when things that appear so obvious aren't considered. Now, this is the part where things get even more embarrassing for Colorado as a whole. Hopefully this isn't a reflection of how inefficient the state is when it comes to its police investigation procedures, because if you thought what I just spoke about was bad, you wait. Now, the DA's office, district attorney, it's usually the state-appointed prosecution, okay? You've seen TV shows and films for all my non-American watchers. Now, the DA's office and the police were at complete loggerheads during the entire investigation. Now, this is supposed to be one of the closest working relationships to make sure you catch the bad person, but neither side wanted to listen to the other. He said, she said, they said, have to be diverse and inclusive. The Ramseys were suspects and then they weren't. 2 of the lead investigators at the time, Lou Schmidt and Steve Thomas, ultimately resigned because of this playground bickering. Schmidt because he believed that the investigation had overlooked the intruder hypothesis, which I'll go into a bit more detail later on in this video, and Thomas because the DA's office failed to support the police investigation and had interfered far too many times. Now, sounds like a sorority cringe fest rather than a professional organisation. You can probably start to understand why the case is still unsolved. Okay, so we've covered some shortcomings of the investigation, and I just want to caveat all of that by saying, look, anyone involved in the police investigation, I'm just going off what I've researched and found. Okay, until I've had one-on-one interviews with you to understand your perception, then it's all I've got to go on. So if you want an interview, let me know, and Serial Chillers will do it. Okay, watchers, let's go on to the suspects this time for this next part. So apart from Jonbenet's parents, you're probably wondering who actually was a suspect, right? Well, the right question is who wasn't a suspect in a 10-mile radius. But in all seriousness, I'll cover some of the more notable suspects. Okay, now I can't completely skip over the Ramsey family, as there was consideration that Burke, Jonbenet's older brother, had been involved. Now the theory, might I add, don't want to get sued, the theory is that Burke had lost his temper when he found that Jonbenet had been eating his pineapples. Okay, so you know the little chunks in the cans. He had found her in the kitchen eating his pineapples, supposedly lost his temper, hit her with the bowl, which ultimately knocked her out, and then he proceeded to strangle her, supposedly. Now, Burke wasn't an official suspect, but in the CBS show, The Case of Jonbenet Ramsey, which aired in 2016, it theorised that during the autopsy, there was a lump of pineapple found in Jonbenet's stomach. And her parents, in police interviews, stated that they can't remember a bowl of pineapples being in the kitchen, or that Jonbenet ever ate pineapple. It then goes on to theorise that Burke killed his sister, as I mentioned earlier, and the parents covered it up with this elaborate ruse. Now, again, it's a complete theory, so don't shoot the messenger. I don't want to receive any legal documents through the post. But to me, it doesn't add up. How would a 9-year-old boy hit someone else with such force that would cause that much trauma to the skull and then go on to strangle her? Yes, okay, there was that nylon cord, but that would mean the involvement of the parents and having to do that rather than take her to the emergency room. It's just doesn't make sense. Now, the second theory, and the one that seems most plausible, is the intruder theory. And this came about because of the unidentified boot mark that was found near Jonbenet's body in the basement. There were a few initial suspects, such as Bill McReynolds, who played the family's Santa Claus at various parties, and ultimately became one of the prime suspects in the case, despite continuously pleading his innocence until his death in 2002. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail in this video, but I've read some of the interviews that people had with Bill, and what he was saying about Jonbenet, some people perceived it as creepy, but I thought it was quite nice. There was no creepiness about it. There was no sex-inspired commentary. It was the words you'd expect of someone who plays Father Christmas. But I'll leave you to go and review those yourselves online. There was also Chris Wolfe, who was a local reporter, who actually was reported as a suspect by his then girlfriend at the time. Now, Chris was involved in a few libel suits with the Ramsey family, but ultimately wasn't considered a main suspect. There was Linda Hoffman-Pugh, who was actually the family's housekeeper, and also Michael Helgoth, who was a local man and, interestingly enough, died in a suspected suicide only weeks after Jonbenet's body was found, which is quite a coincidence. But with all of these suspects and hundreds more, yes, hundreds, you heard that right. So when I talked about a 10-mile radius earlier, I wasn't joking. DNA returned no matches. Now, the intruder theory was supported by Lou Schmidt, a detective that I mentioned earlier on in this video. And he theorised that someone had used a stun gun to incapacitate Jonbenet before bringing her down to the basement and killing her, and then left a ransom note to throw off the police. Now, I don't know about you, but it all seems like one of those low-budget B-movies where terrible writers that can't get into Hollywood create, and then they go on Amazon Prime for 99 cents. Now, many cynics have come forward to refute this theory because the evidence just doesn't back it up. Because Lou Schmidt said that the perpetrator came in through the basement, which doesn't make sense because the basement window in some of the pictures shows that there are undisturbed cobwebs on the window itself. There was a steel grate that covered the window, which had cobwebs on it, and they were also undisturbed. And there was undisturbed foliage around the entrance to the window. So, undisturbed seems like my buzzword at the moment. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, viewers, but cobwebs aren't that sturdy. One swipe and they're gone. So, either way, Schmidt continued to work on the case heroically until his death in 2010. Now, the part that you were all probably suspecting was going to come, but not really wanting to hear, was the theory around sexual predators. Now, of course, due to Jonbenet's involvement in the pageant scene, it was theorised that online sexual predators and local paedophiles could have been involved. Now, there were movements made around 1998, and a grand jury was actually convened to indict the Ramseys on charges relating to the case. Not murder, charges relating to the case, which coincides with this whole theory around online sexual predators. And they involved placing the child at risk that led to her death and obstructing an investigation for murder. What obstructions, you're probably thinking? Well, none really, as the Boulder County DA at the time, Alex Hunter, said he couldn't prove beyond reasonable doubt to bring a criminal trial against them. And it wasn't until 2008 that the Ramseys were finally exonerated by DA at the time, Mary Lucy. But there'd been conversations and discussions and whispers in the local community that they'd got quite pally-pally, friendly with Mary Lucy. But her reasoning was due to new DNA sampling and testing techniques, it was more probable that an intruder murdered Jonbenet than her family, which was no real comfort to Patsy Ramsey, as she had died from ovarian cancer in 2006, never knowing who had killed her daughter. Now, back to the suspects involved in this theory. There were 38 registered sex offenders living in a 2-mile radius of the Ramsey home. However, reports suggest there hadn't been an aggressive enough investigation into this line of inquiry, which totally blows my mind. This is according to author Stephen Singular in his book, Presumed Guilty, that there was too much focus on the Ramsey parents as being the killers than any other line of inquiry. And just before we wrap it up, there was also one false confession too. Alexis Valoran Reich, interesting surname, had confessed to police that he, or now she, had drugged and sexually assaulted Jonbenet before killing her. But police poo-pooed this notion, as Alexis only gave up information that was available in the public domain and nothing that indicated that they were somebody who'd been heavily involved in the case or in the actual murder of Jonbenet. Alexis also seemed to have a lot of psychological issues, which probably culminated in this false confession. Now, in 2010 and 2016, there were inklings that the case could be officially reopened due to new evidence. The Ramseys were again dragged into it, and arguments made against the evidence used to exonerate the Ramseys being superficial and light at best, but no prosecutions have ever been made, and it's still down as an unsolved cold case today. So viewers, there ends the sad but true case of Jonbenet Ramsey. I'm sure you'll join me in hoping that at some point in the future, their family can get the answers and closure that they need and deserve. If you like this video, please remember to give it a like and subscribe and hit that bell notification so you don't miss any future episodes. Until next time, viewers, stay safe.